The Hells Angels biker heard the little girl cry beside a memorial wall, and what he did next terrified the ones who followed her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. On a quiet, chilly evening, the streets seemed empty, and the wind howled through the alleyways. The fading light of the setting sun barely touched the surface of the stone memorial wall that stood in the corner of the park. It had been a memorial to fallen soldiers for decades, but tonight, something felt different. It was silent, save for a faint sound that echoed between the stone walls. The sound of a soft, but persistent, sobbing. The Hells Angels biker, known as Jake Razor Morrison, had been riding through town, his Harley-Davidson roaring like thunder as it cut through the quiet streets. His mind was elsewhere, lost in the hum of the road. He had just passed the memorial wall when he heard it, a faint cry. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder, more desperate. He slowed his bike, glancing around in confusion. There, huddled against the wall, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 8 or 9, with messy, dark hair, wearing a torn jacket that barely seemed to keep out the cold. Her face was buried in her hands, and the sobs were so heavy, they shook her tiny frame. Razor's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't the kind of man to get involved in other people's business. His leather jacket, the patches on his back, and the reputation that followed him like a shadow were enough to make most people cross the street when they saw him. But this wasn't just any person. This was a child, alone and crying in the cold night. Razor dismounted his bike, his boots crunching the gravel underfoot as he walked toward her. His instincts screamed at him to keep walking, to ignore it, but he couldn't. The look of pure fear on her face stopped him cold. He crouched down in front of her, careful not to startle her further. "Hey kid," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with terror. She trembled, and for a moment, Razor thought she might bolt. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Razor's heart tightened at her words. She was scared of him. He cursed under his breath. No one should be that afraid, especially a child. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, his tone reassuring. "I'm here to help. What's your name?" The girl didn't speak at first, just stared at him with those wide, fearful eyes. Razor felt a pang of guilt. He knew the look. He had seen it before in too many people. People who were used to being afraid, used to being hurt. After a long pause, the girl finally spoke. "Emily," she said in a small voice. "Emily, huh?" Razor repeated, offering her a soft smile. "I'm Jake, but you can call me Razor." Emily looked at him for a long time before nodding. He reached out his hand slowly, and after what seemed like an eternity, she took it, her grip shaky. Razor pulled her gently to her feet, but as she stood, she winced in pain. Her leg buckled beneath her, and she collapsed against him. "What happened?" Razor asked, his voice firm, though concern laced his words. Emily shook her head, her tears mixing with the dirt on her face. I don't know," she whispered. I was running, and they were chasing me. I didn't know where to go, and then I found this place." Razor frowned, sensing something was wrong. Someone had been chasing her. But who? And why? The wind picked up, making the night feel even colder. Razor didn't waste any more time. He carefully helped Emily onto the back of his bike, making sure she was steady before starting the engine. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice low. As the bike roared to life, Razor felt the weight of the situation settle over him. Something wasn't right, and he was about to find out what. As Razor's Harley roared to life, the cold night air whipped through Emily's hair, her small hands clutching his leather jacket. Tightly. She seemed to relax a little, but her body trembled, not just from the cold but from fear. Razor could feel the weight of her worry, the way her tiny form stiffened with every twist of the road. It wasn't just the chill of the night or the dark streets ahead. Something was following them. He could feel it in his bones. Something wasn't right. He glanced back over his shoulder but saw nothing. Only the empty road stretching behind them. Razor kept his focus on the road ahead, but his instincts were on high alert. His years of riding and his training in the Hells Angels had made him aware of things others might miss. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as the sound of tires skimming over wet pavement reached his ears. He wasn't alone on this road anymore. Razor's grip tightened on the handlebars, and he sped up, pushing the bike forward, weaving in and out of the winding streets. He needed to get Emily to safety, away from whatever, or whoever, was following them. The wind picked up, howling as if warning them, but Emily's quiet sobs broke through the roar of the engine. Razor didn't dare take his eyes off the road but spoke over his shoulder. "Hey, kid, stay with me. You're safe. We're getting somewhere safe." Emily nodded, her small hands now clutching his waist as tightly as she could. Razor pushed forward, his heart pounding as he made a sharp turn, taking them off the main road and onto a less traveled path. The streets here were empty, dark, and silent. This was the place he usually came to clear his head, but tonight, it felt like a trap. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up again. He was being followed, and he could sense the weight of eyes on his back. The sound of the tires grew louder, closer, and Razor knew it was no coincidence. He was being tracked. His eyes scanned the shadows ahead, searching for anything that didn't belong. Emily was still clinging to him, but he knew that something dangerous was on their tail. Just as he was about to make another turn, a set of headlights blinded him in the rearview mirror. Razor's heart skipped a beat. He swerved to the side of the road, narrowly avoiding a collision, but the other vehicle didn't stop. It was gaining on them. Razor's pulse quickened. He needed to get Emily somewhere safe, and fast. But there was nowhere to hide here. "Hold on tight," Razor said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Emily's grip tightened, her body shaking against him. Razor could hear the sound of the car's engine revving louder, getting closer with every passing second. It was clear now, the car wasn't just following them. It was hunting them. Razor cursed under his breath. He pushed the bike harder, trying to outrun the vehicle behind them. The road was getting steeper, winding higher into the hills. The last thing he needed was to get cornered. He could hear the vehicle's tires screeching behind him, getting closer and closer. He had to make a choice, keep running or stop and face whatever was coming for them. Razor knew the only way out was to confront it. With a deep breath, he slammed the brakes and swerved the bike around a sharp bend, sending them down a narrow, rocky path. The sound of the tires following them stopped for a moment, as if the other vehicle had hesitated. Razor didn't have time to wait. He glanced at Emily, her wide eyes full of fear, but there was something else there, something else that told him she was braver than most people twice her age. "We'll be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was convincing her or himself. The sound of the vehicle's engine roared back into life. Razor wasn't going to outrun it. He had to turn and face it. The path up ahead narrowed, but there was a steep drop to the side, one that could either get them away or lead them straight into danger. Razor's mind raced, but one thing was clear, he couldn't let them catch up. He gripped the handlebars, pushing forward with all the force he could muster. Emily clung tighter to him, her small body pressed up against his back, but Razor could feel the tremble in her. He didn't blame her. The tension was thick enough to slice through. But as they reached the top of the hill, Razor's instinct screamed that it was time to make his move. He turned sharply to the right, heading for a dead-end road. It was a risk, but he didn't have another choice. The car following them wasn't going to let up, and if Razor didn't act now, Emily would be in serious danger. Razor's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. This was his chance. As they reached the end of the road, Razor gunned the engine and turned around, preparing for the confrontation that was about to unfold. The screeching tires of the car behind them filled the night air, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a spotlight on Razor's back. He could hear the engine growling louder as it closed the distance between them. The road they were on was narrow and winding, the kind of path that was perfect for an escape, but only if you had the skills to make it work. Razor gritted his teeth, gripping the handlebars of his Harley even tighter. He could feel Emily's small form pressed against him, her hands gripping his waist with all the strength she could muster. The fear in her body was palpable, but she held on without saying a word. She trusted him. That trust fueled him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Razor's eyes flicked over his shoulder, spotting the car just as it made the sharp turn behind them. It was gaining on them. He had to think fast. The road was heading into a more wooded area. the trees dense enough to block out the moonlight. He knew this area well, but he also knew it could be a trap. If the car was relentless, they wouldn't be able to outrun it for long. A decision had to be made. Razor's heart raced as he calculated his next move. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, but he had to keep a cool head. He made a snap decision. With one quick flick of the wrist, he turned sharply into a narrow trail that cut through the woods. The bike skidded as the tires hit the dirt, but Razor kept control, his body moving with the bike's every shift. The car followed. Of course it followed. The sound of the engine behind them was too loud to ignore. It was relentless, just like the people who sent it after them. Razor gritted his teeth, pushing the bike faster as the trail narrowed even more, the trees now pressing in from both sides. He had only one option now. He had to lose them. Razor's mind raced, and just as he reached a clearing, he saw it. A steep incline. The path led up to a small hill, and beyond that, it opened up to a cliff. If he could make it up, they could at least escape the immediate danger. But it was risky. The incline was steep, and the bike wasn't built for this kind of terrain. Hold on tight. Razor called over his shoulder to Emily. Her grip tightened, and he felt her head rest against his back as she nodded. He could feel the fear in her, but there was something else there too. Something that told him she was ready for whatever came next. Razor revved the engine, his heart pounding in his chest. The tires hit the base of the incline, and the bike lurched forward. Razor fought to keep it steady, knowing that one wrong move could send them tumbling down the side of the hill. The engine roared, but the bike was slowing down, its wheels struggling for grip in the loose dirt. Behind them, the car was still there, still chasing. Razor's muscles burned as he leaned into the bike, trying to push it up faster. Emily's arms were tight around his waist now, her body pressed close to him as she felt the shift in the air. Razor glanced back, just in time to see the car's headlights illuminating the base of the hill. It was coming up fast. Razor's chest tightened as he made a split-second decision. He couldn't outrun the car. He had to make it up the hill and use the cliff to his advantage. As the bike reached the top of the incline, Razor slammed on the brakes, sending the bike into a sharp turn. It slid sideways, the tires skidding on the loose dirt as the car barreled toward them. Razor gritted his teeth and used every ounce of strength he had left to get the bike to stop at the edge of the cliff. The car was too close. They were too close. Razor's heart was hammering in his chest, his hands trembling as he reached for his gun. He had to protect Emily. He had to stop whoever was chasing them. As the car neared, Razor braced himself. The vehicle came to a screeching halt just behind him, the driver slamming on the brakes as the headlights flooded the cliffside. Razor's eyes narrowed, and his hand hovered over his weapon. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The door to the car flew open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a black leather jacket, his face obscured by the shadows. But Razor knew the type. He'd dealt with enough of them in his time. The man's voice cut through the night. "Get off the bike now." Razor didn't move. He didn't flinch. "You're not getting her," Razor said, his voice low and steady. The man chuckled, the sound cold and mocking. "She's not yours to protect, biker." Razor's jaw tightened, his grip on the handlebars never wavering. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when Emily's safety was on the line. The man took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Razor could feel Emily's breath against his back, her small hands still clutching him tightly. The moment was about to break. The tension in the air was thick enough to suffocate them. But Razor wasn't going to let it break him. Not now. Not ever. The man took another step forward, his boots crunching against the dirt as the moonlight glinted off his leather jacket. Razor's grip tightened on the handlebars, his knuckles white with tension. Emily was still clinging to him, her body trembling against his back, and Razor could feel the fear radiating off of her. The air between them was thick with hostility, and Razor knew this wasn't just a random encounter. The man in front of him wasn't just some thug, it was personal. "You're making a big mistake," Razor said, his voice low and unwavering. The man stopped, his cold eyes narrowing as he took in the biker's defiance. "You think I care about your threats?" he sneered. "You should have stayed out of this, biker. This doesn't concern you." Razor's mind raced, trying to piece together the situation. He had no idea who this man was or why he was chasing them, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let him take Emily. "It's already my problem," Razor said, his tone sharp. "And it's not going to be yours for long." The man chuckled darkly, reaching inside his jacket. Razor's eyes snapped to his movement, instinctively pulling Emily closer, as if to shield her from whatever was about to happen. But instead of pulling out a weapon, the man pulled out a phone, his finger tapping rapidly across the screen. "You're not the only one who's been watching," the man said, his voice now laced with malice. "I've got friends, you know, and they don't take kindly to people getting in their way." Razor's stomach twisted. He had to act, and fast. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a coordinated effort, and if he didn't move quickly, Emily's life was on the line. Razor's eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but the cliffside offered no escape. He couldn't fight them all, not here, not now. But there was one thing Razor could do. He could buy them time. He wasn't going to let this man take Emily. Razor's hand shot to his side, where his gun was holstered, but before he could draw it, the sound of an engine roared from the distance. The man's expression shifted for a brief moment, confusion flickering across his face. Razor didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger, the loud bang splitting the night air. The bullet hit the ground near the man's feet, sending him stumbling back. "Get on the bike, Emily," Razor barked. Emily didn't hesitate. She scrambled onto the bike, wrapping her arms around Razor's waist as he gunned the engine. The sound of the Harley's roar drowned out everything else, but Razor's mind was still focused on the man in front of him. The car was still there, and the man was still watching them. Razor's eyes darted to the rearview mirror as he sped forward, the adrenaline coursing through him. They were not alone, and Razor could feel the weight of that fact settling heavily on his chest. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but there was no turning back now. As they tore through the narrow path, Razor could hear the screech of tires behind him, the sound of the car chasing them down the same trail. The car's headlights blazed behind them, but Razor wasn't going to slow down. He wasn't going to let anyone catch them. They had to get away. Razor's mind was racing. He had to lose the car. He had to protect Emily. The road ahead was straight, but the trees on either side were closing in. The trail was narrow, the loose gravel making the bike slip slightly with every turn. But Razor wasn't afraid of a little danger, not anymore. He could feel the man's eyes on them, and it only fueled his desire to escape. He wasn't about to let Emily get hurt. As they reached the edge of the woods, Razor saw it. The road up ahead veered to the left, and he made the decision instantly. He turned sharply, the tires sliding as the bike drifted dangerously close to the edge. He could feel Emily's body press harder against his, but she didn't let go. Razor wasn't sure if she was scared or just determined, but he knew one thing. She trusted him, and that was enough to keep him going. They shot forward, the bike roaring as they sped along the path. Razor could see the headlights of the car still chasing them, getting closer with each passing second. The man in the car was relentless. Razor's heart was pounding, but he kept his focus on the road ahead. He needed a way out, a place to lose the car. His eyes scanned the area ahead, looking for anything that could help them. And then he saw it. A small bridge ahead, just wide enough for the bike to fit through. It was their only chance. Without hesitation, Razor swerved the bike toward the bridge, feeling the tires struggle to grip the damp ground. The car wasn't far behind, but the bridge was close. Razor gunned the engine, the bike surging forward as they reached the edge of the bridge. The car was too close. There was no way they were going to make it. Razor's heart pounded in his chest as he leaned into the bike, pushing it to its limit. The car was closing in, the screech of its tires loud in his ears. But then, just as they reached the bridge, the car made its move. The headlights flashed, and the car slammed into the side of the bridge. Razor didn't look back. He kept going. The man was off course now, and Razor was determined to make it to the other side. The engine roared, the sound of the Harley filling the air as they sped away. Razor didn't know if the man had survived, but he didn't care. His only focus was Emily. And for now, they were safe. The night was eerily quiet as Razor sped down the road, his mind still racing from the near collision with the car. The tires of his Harley screeched against the cold asphalt as he navigated the winding road, trying to put as much distance between them and the danger they had narrowly escaped. Emily was still holding on tightly to his waist, her small form pressed against his back, but Razor could feel the tension in her grip. She was scared, and he didn't blame her. They had just narrowly escaped death, and now they were on the run, with no clear destination in mind. The only thing that mattered was getting away from the people who were after them. Razor's heart was still pounding in his chest, but he kept his focus on the road ahead. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. The last thing he needed was to get caught in another trap. The engine of the bike roared beneath them as they hit a stretch of straight road, the wind whipping past them. Razor could feel Emily's arms tighten around him, and for a moment, he let himself feel the weight of the situation. He wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was protecting her. And that was a responsibility he wasn't about to take lightly. As the miles ticked by, Razor's mind wandered back to the man they had just escaped. The look in his eyes had been cold, calculating, and Razor had no doubt that the man was part of something much bigger than just a random encounter. He was hunting them. But why? Razor's gut told him that Emily was at the center of it all. There was something about her that made her a target. But what? Razor didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let anyone get to her. Not on his watch. The road ahead stretched on, dark and empty, but Razor didn't feel any safer. He had to find a place to lay low, somewhere they could regroup and figure out what to do next. But that was easier said than done. Razor had spent most of his life on the move, never staying in one place for too long. He knew how to disappear, but he couldn't disappear forever, not with Emily in tow. He had to think. He couldn't outrun his past, and he certainly couldn't outrun the people hunting them. Razor's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The coast seemed clear for now, but he knew better than to get complacent. He had been in enough dangerous situations to know that things could change in an instant. The headlights of another car briefly appeared in the distance, but Razor quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't close enough to worry about yet. He took a deep breath, focusing on the road. The night was cold, the kind of cold that made everything feel distant, like they were the only two people left in the world. He could feel the weight of Emily's presence behind him, the way she was clinging to him for dear life. It was a heavy responsibility, but it was also a reminder of what was at stake. Emily needed him. He couldn't fail her. As they continued down the road, Razor's thoughts returned to the moment they had just escaped. The man in the car had been too close, too relentless, and Razor knew they wouldn't be safe for long. It was only a matter of time before the others found them. Razor had learned the hard way that the people chasing him weren't just out for money or revenge, they were out for control. And control was something Razor was never willing to give up. He had fought for his freedom his entire life, and now, he had to fight for Emily's too. Razor's grip on the handlebars tightened as he made a sharp turn, the bike leaning into the curve. Emily was still clinging to him, but Razor could sense that she was starting to trust him, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it made him feel like he was doing the right thing. He couldn't let her down. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, but Razor knew that they couldn't keep running forever. They needed to figure out their next move. He had to find a place to hide, a place where they could rest and regroup. He could feel his body beginning to tire, but he pushed through the exhaustion. He couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Razor glanced in the rearview mirror again. The car that had been following them was still there, but it was much farther behind now. Razor took a deep breath, relieved for the moment, but he didn't allow himself to relax. The danger wasn't over, and it wouldn't be, until they were safe. They needed a plan, a place to go. Razor's mind raced as he thought about his options. There was one place he could go, one place where he knew he'd be able to lay low for a while. It was an old cabin in the woods, a place he had used to disappear when things got too hot. It wasn't much, but it would give them time to breathe, to figure out what to do next. Razor made a decision. He would take Emily there. It was the safest option. As they sped down the road, Razor kept his eyes on the horizon. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't let anything happen to Emily. Not as long as he had breath in his body. The cabin loomed ahead, a small, weathered structure tucked deep in the woods, far away from the noise of the city and the chaos that had been chasing them. Razor slowed his bike as they approached, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. The road leading up to the cabin was rough, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, but Razor had been here before, and he knew it well. This place had always been his safe haven, the one place he could disappear when things got too hot. Now, it was the only place he could think of to keep Emily safe. He pulled up in front of the cabin, cutting the engine and listening for any signs of danger. The woods were silent, the only sound the rustling of the trees in the wind. Razor glanced behind them. half expecting to see headlights approaching, but the road remained clear. He breathed a sigh of relief. For now, they were safe. Razor dismounted the bike, his muscles sore from the long ride, but he pushed the pain aside. He turned to Emily, who had already slid off the bike and was looking around nervously. "We're here," he said, his voice soft but reassuring. Emily didn't say anything, but her eyes moved around, taking in the cabin and the surrounding woods. It was clear that she was exhausted, her small body trembling from the long ride, but she didn't show it. She had been strong, far stronger than Razor had expected. He could feel the weight of her trust on his shoulders, and it made him more determined than ever to keep her safe. Razor opened the door to the cabin, the old hinges creaking as he stepped inside. The interior was modest but functional. A few chairs, a small wood stove, and a stack of firewood in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. "I'll get a fire going," Razor said, his voice breaking the silence. Emily nodded but didn't say anything as she moved to the small table in the corner and sat down. Razor couldn't help but notice the exhaustion on her face. She had been through so much, and he couldn't help but feel responsible for putting her in this situation. He grabbed a few logs and placed them in the stove, quickly getting the fire started. The warmth from the flames filled the room, and Razor could hear the faint crackle of the wood burning. As the heat spread through the cabin, Emily seemed to relax a little, her tense shoulders loosening as she gazed into the fire. Razor sat down across from her, his eyes never leaving her. He needed to know more. He needed to understand what was happening, why they were being hunted. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Can you tell me who they are? Who's chasing you?" Emily's eyes flicked to him, and for a moment, Razor thought she might not say anything. But then, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know why they want me. I didn't do anything." Razor's heart sank. It was the answer he had feared. She didn't know. The people after her didn't care about the truth. They only cared about getting what they wanted. And Razor had no idea what that was. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you remember anything? Anything at all about why they're after you?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know. I've been running for so long. I don't remember anymore." Razor ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. He had to protect her, but he needed answers. Whoever was after Emily was dangerous, and Razor couldn't afford to let his guard down. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The fire crackled in the background, the only sound breaking the silence between them. Razor sat back, his mind racing. They needed a plan. They needed to figure out what to do next. "We'll stay here for now," Razor said, breaking the silence. "We'll figure it out, Emily. We're safe here for the moment." Emily nodded, but there was still a trace of fear in her eyes. Razor could see the weight of the world on her small shoulders, and he knew it wasn't just the fear of being chased. It was the fear of not knowing who was after her or why. Razor stood up, his eyes still fixed on Emily. "You're safe here. I won't let them get to you. I'll protect you, no matter what." Emily finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she whispered. Razor nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the promise he had just made. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. Not on his watch. Razor moved to the window, peering out into the woods. The silence of the night was deafening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. They were safe. For now. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the cabin, its warmth filling the room as Razor stood near the window, his eyes scanning the dense woods surrounding them. The darkness outside seemed almost suffocating, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Razor couldn't help but feel like they were being watched, but he couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled deep in his chest. The night had been too quiet since they had arrived, and every rustle of the wind or snap of a twig sent his instincts into overdrive. Emily was sitting on the couch now, her eyes fixated on the fire, but her body was stiff, her posture tense. She had been through so much, and Razor knew the weight of it was starting to take its toll on her. She was just a kid. She should be safe. She shouldn't have to deal with any of this. But the reality of the situation was unavoidable. She was here with him, and Razor would be damned if he let anyone hurt her. Razor took a deep breath, his mind racing. He needed to come up with a plan. He couldn't just hide out in this cabin forever. He had no idea how many people were after Emily, but the fact that they had already found them once made it clear that this wasn't just some random pursuit. They were being hunted, and the people chasing them weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. Razor had learned the hard way that running wasn't always an option. Sooner or later, you had to face your enemies head-on. He turned away from the window and walked back to where Emily was sitting. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Emily gave a small nod, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't okay. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though Razor could see the fear still lingering in her gaze. "You don't have to lie to me," Razor said gently, sitting down beside her. "I know this is hard, but you're not alone in this, okay?" Emily shifted uncomfortably, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't know what's going on," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are they after me? Why won't they leave me alone?" Razor's heart clenched at the question. He had been wondering the same thing. Whatever it wasn't something Emily had done. She was just a kid. But for some reason, she had become the target of something much bigger than her. "I don't know," Razor admitted, his voice tight with frustration. "But we'll figure it out. I promise you, we'll get to the bottom of this." Emily looked up at him, her expression filled with a mixture of fear and hope. It was a look Razor had seen in too many people over the years. People who were desperately clinging to the hope that someone would come through for them. He could see it in her eyes, and it was a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. But he would. "What if we don't?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Razor's chest tightened. The thought of failing her was unbearable. "We will," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." Emily looked at him for a long moment, as if she was trying to gauge if he was telling the truth. Finally, she nodded, though there was still uncertainty in her eyes. Razor stood up, his mind working over their next move. The cabin wasn't a long-term solution. They couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, someone would find them, and they needed to be ready. Razor moved to the small table in the corner of the cabin and began rummaging through his bag, pulling out a map and a few supplies. "We need to keep moving," he said, spreading the map out in front of him. Emily stood beside him, her eyes following his fingers as he traced the route. "There's a town about 50 miles from here," Razor said, pointing to a small dot on the map. "It's a quiet place. We can lay low for a while, figure out our next steps." Emily nodded, though Razor could see the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't want to move again. She just wanted to be safe. Razor couldn't blame her. But staying here wasn't an option. Not with the people after them. "You don't have to worry," Razor said, looking up at her. "We're going to be okay." The words felt hollow, even to him, but he had to believe it. He had to. Razor folded the map and shoved it into his jacket pocket. "We'll leave first thing in the morning. I'll make sure we're prepared." Emily didn't say anything, but her shoulders seemed to relax a little. Razor could see the exhaustion weighing on her. They had been through so much already. The long ride, the escape, the fear of being hunted, it had all taken a toll. But they were still alive. And as long as they were, Razor would do everything in his power to protect her. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "I'll take the first watch." Emily hesitated but nodded, moving toward the small cot in the corner of the cabin. Razor watched her for a moment, his heart heavy with the responsibility he had taken on. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about keeping a promise. And Razor wasn't about to break it. He turned back to the window, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. He knew the danger wasn't over. It would never be over until they figured out who was behind all of this. But for now, they had a little time. And Razor wasn't about to waste it. The cold morning air bit at Razor's face as he stepped out of the cabin, his boots crunching against the frosty ground. The sun was still low on the horizon, the first light of dawn barely breaking through the trees. He glanced back toward the cabin, where Emily was still asleep, her exhaustion from the past few days finally catching up with her. Razor's mind was racing with thoughts of what came next. They couldn't stay here long. The longer they stayed, the greater the chance of someone finding them. He couldn't risk that. Razor had been on the run for most of his life, but this was different. Emily wasn't just another fugitive. She was a kid, and the people chasing her weren't just after her, they were after something bigger. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. He had survived this long because he had learned to trust his gut, and right now, his gut was telling him they weren't safe here. Razor's hand rested on the handle of the gun tucked into his waistband. He didn't want to use it. He never wanted to use it. But he knew that if push came to shove, he wouldn't hesitate to protect Emily. She was the only thing that mattered now. The only thing keeping him grounded. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in his head. Razor turned and made his way to the small creek that ran behind the cabin. The sound of rushing water a temporary distraction from the weight of the situation. He knelt beside the stream, letting the cold water run over his hands as he tried to clear his mind. The path ahead wasn't clear, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed answers. They needed to find out who was behind the people chasing them. But how? Razor's thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of a car engine. He stiffened, his eyes snapping to the road. The sound was faint at first, but it was unmistakable. Someone was coming. Razor stood up, his heart pounding. He couldn't let Emily see this. He had to protect her, no matter what. He moved quickly back toward the cabin, his mind racing. Who was it? Did they finally catch up with them? Razor's hand instinctively went to his gun again, but he paused. No, he couldn't act too hastily. He needed to know what was going on. He needed to make sure it wasn't just another random passerby. Razor reached the cabin and carefully peeked around the corner, scanning the road. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the car, a black SUV coming up the dirt road toward the cabin. It wasn't like the cars they had seen before. This one was high-end, sleek, and well-maintained, and it wasn't driving like a normal traveler. It was driving cautiously, as if the driver knew exactly where they were. Razor's pulse quickened. It wasn't just some random driver. Whoever was in that vehicle was searching for them. He had no doubt about it. Razor's mind raced as he considered his options. He couldn't let them get too close. Not yet. He needed more information. He had to find out who was in the SUV and what they wanted. Razor slowly moved back into the cabin, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. Emily was still asleep, her face relaxed for the first time in days, but Razor didn't have time to rest. He needed to stay one step ahead. He grabbed his bag, checked the map once more, and slipped the gun back into its holster. Razor knew the woods around the cabin like the back of his hand. He had spent plenty of time here in the past, and it was his best chance of staying hidden. He quietly opened the door, stepping out into the cold morning air once more. The SUV was still making its way toward the cabin, the engine's hum growing louder as it approached. Razor moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows as he navigated his way through the trees. He had to get a closer look, figure out who was behind the wheel. As he crouched behind a large tree, Razor could hear the SUV's tires crunching over the gravel, and his heart rate spiked. This wasn't a random visitor. This was someone looking for them. Razor peered around the tree, keeping a safe distance. The SUV slowed as it neared the cabin and eventually came to a stop just in front. Razor's eyes narrowed as the door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit and dark sunglasses. Razor's pulse quickened. This man was no ordinary civilian. He was either military or ex-law enforcement, someone with training. The man looked around, scanning the area, his eyes narrowing as he took in the surroundings. Razor's hand went to his gun again. He knew he couldn't just stand here and wait to be found. He had to move. But just as he was about to turn to leave, the sound of footsteps behind him made him freeze. He turned slowly, his hand still on the gun. There, standing in the shadows, was Emily. She had followed him, her face full of concern, her eyes wide as she stared at the man in the suit. "Who's that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Razor didn't answer immediately. He had been so focused on the SUV that he hadn't realized she had woken up. "Stay here," he said softly, his voice firm but not harsh. "Do not move." Emily nodded, her eyes locked on the man in the suit. Razor slowly backed away, his eyes never leaving the figure in the clearing. He had to act fast. The man was already looking around, his posture tense. Razor needed to get ahead of him. He couldn't let Emily be caught in the crossfire. With one last glance at Emily, Razor moved into the woods, disappearing into the trees, his mind focused on one thing: keeping her safe. The man in the black suit took another slow, calculated step toward the cabin. Razor's breath hitched as he crouched behind a thick cluster of trees, careful not to make a sound. The man's figure seemed unnervingly calm, but Razor knew better than to underestimate someone like him. There was a sharpness to his movements, the kind that came from training, military, law enforcement, or something even darker. Razor's fingers tightened around the gun holstered at his waist. He had already promised Emily that he would protect her, and he wasn't about to let someone like this wreck their only chance at survival. Razor waited, watching through a gap in the trees as the man surveyed the area, his eyes scanning the woods methodically. Razor's heart beat faster as the man stopped just a few feet from where he had been standing moments before. The air felt thick with tension, but Razor couldn't make his move just yet. The last thing he needed was to draw attention before he knew who this man was and what he wanted. For what seemed like an eternity, the man stood still, his eyes narrowing, as if he knew something was off. Razor froze, holding his breath, barely daring to blink. His muscles were tense, aching from the stillness, but he kept his focus on the man. The forest was dead silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. The man's footsteps resumed, this time heading directly toward the cabin. Razor's mind raced as he quickly adjusted his position, keeping a safe distance between them. He couldn't let this man get any closer to Emily. The last thing he wanted was for her to get caught in the crossfire. Razor moved silently through the woods, his eyes constantly flicking between the man in the suit and the cabin in the distance. His instincts told him that the man wasn't alone, that there were more people in the area. But Razor didn't have time to confirm it. He had to act quickly. He circled back toward the cabin, staying out of sight, and slowly crept toward the back door. Emily was still inside, and Razor needed to make sure she stayed hidden. He hadn't heard her move, but he wasn't willing to take any chances. Razor pushed the door open as quietly as possible, stepping inside. The cabin was dimly lit, the only light coming from the low-burning fire in the corner. Emily was still sitting by the hearth, her eyes wide and full of worry. She looked up when she heard the door creak open, her face pale. "Razor," she whispered, her voice small. "What's going on?" Razor's heart twisted at the sight of her. This innocent kid caught up in something far too dangerous for her age. "Stay quiet, Emily," he said softly, crossing the room toward her. "There's a man outside. I don't know who he is yet, but we need to be ready." Emily nodded, her eyes never leaving his. Razor moved to the window, glancing through the small gap between the blinds. He saw the man now standing by the door of the cabin, his hand resting casually by his side. It was as if the man was waiting for something, watching the cabin as if he expected someone to emerge. Razor's fingers hovered near the door, considering his options. He didn't want to take the chance of engaging this man unless he absolutely had to. Razor looked back at Emily, her small form sitting rigid on the couch, her face pale with fear. He felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had put her in this situation, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was counting on him to fix it, to make it right. Razor's gaze hardened as he made his decision. "Stay here. Don't move," he told her, his voice steady but firm. Emily's lip trembled, but she nodded silently, her eyes brimming with trust. Razor couldn't help but admire her courage. He moved back to the door, his body tense, ready for whatever came next. He slipped outside again, moving with the quiet precision of a predator. He stayed low, his boots barely making a sound against the soft earth. As he approached the man, he could see that the stranger had stopped by the edge of the woods, his gaze shifting back toward the road. Razor took a deep breath and then, without warning, darted forward, closing the gap between them. The man never saw him coming. Razor tackled him to the ground, his body slamming into the stranger's with all the force he could muster. The man grunted in surprise, but quickly tried to shove Razor off. Razor's hand shot out, grabbing for the man's wrist, twisting it to immobilize him. The struggle was brief, but intense, the two men locked in a desperate contest of strength. Razor's heart raced, but he couldn't let his guard down for a second. He had to make sure the man didn't call for help. Finally, Razor's superior position won out. He pinned the man's arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground. "Who are you?" Razor growled, his voice low and deadly. The man grunted, struggling beneath Razor's weight, but didn't answer. Razor pressed harder, his knee in the man's back, making sure he couldn't move. "You're going to tell me who you're working for," Razor said, his voice sharp. The man let out a pained laugh, his chest heaving with each breath. "You think you can stop us?" he spat. "We're everywhere. You can't hide from us." Razor's grip tightened. "Who is we?" The man's smirk faded slightly as Razor's grip on his wrist tightened. "You'll find out soon enough," the man muttered. Razor wasn't about to let him get away with that. He pulled his gun from its holster, pointing it directly at the man's head. Tell me what I want to. No, Razor warned. Or you're going to wish you had. The man's eyes narrowed as Razor pressed the gun harder against his temple, his breathing ragged from the struggle. You're not going to get anything out of me, the man muttered, his voice laced with defiance. Razor's grip tightened around the gun, his patience wearing thin. You're going to tell me what I want to know, or I'm going to make sure you regret this, Razor growled, his voice steady but dangerous. The man let out a bitter laugh, still struggling beneath Razor's weight. You really think you can scare me? You don't know who you're dealing with. Razor's heart was pounding, and his mind was racing. He didn't have time to play games with this man. He needed information, and he needed it fast. Who are you working for? What do they want with Emily? Razor demanded, his voice sharp. The man was silent for a moment, as if considering his next words. Razor was about to press harder when the man finally spoke, his voice low and filled with contempt. You think she's just some innocent girl, don't you? You have no idea what she's involved in. You don't even know what she's capable of. Razor's brows furrowed. The man's words hit him like a punch to the gut. Emily? What could she possibly be involved in? She was just a kid, confused, scared, alone. Razor didn't believe a word of it, but something about the way the man said it unsettled him. What are you talking about? Razor's voice was cold, his grip tightening. I don't have time for cryptic nonsense. Who are you working for? The man's smirk faded as he looked Razor directly in the eyes. You think you're protecting her, but you're just a pawn in a bigger game. They've been watching her for years. They've been waiting for the right moment to take her. Razor's mind whirled. Who were they? And what did this man mean by taking her? Who are they? What do you want with Emily? Razor demanded again, his voice firm and insistent. The man's eyes flicked to the side, and for a split second, Razor thought he saw something like fear flicker across his face. You don't know the half of it. The people behind all of this, they don't care who gets hurt. They just want what's theirs. Razor's pulse quickened. This was getting worse by the second. What's hers? What do you mean? Razor's voice was almost a whisper now, the weight of the situation sinking in. The man swallowed hard before answering, his voice barely audible. She's the key. They need her. She doesn't even know it, but she's connected to something bigger than you or me. You're both in way over your heads. Razor's mind raced as he processed the words. Emily was the key to something. He had no idea what the man was talking about, but the implication was clear. Whatever was going on, it was far more complicated than he had imagined. Razor stood up, pulling the man to his feet with ease. I don't care what game you're in. You're not going to touch her, Razor said through gritted teeth. The man's expression turned grim as he regained his footing. You think you can stop this? You have no idea what's coming for you. Razor felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his composure. He wasn't going to let fear control him, not now. I've been in worse situations than this, Razor said, his voice unwavering. I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. The man's lips twisted into a sinister grin. You're just delaying the inevitable, he said, his eyes gleaming with malice. They'll find you. They'll find her. And when they do, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Razor's anger flared. He wanted to end this man's life right then and there, but he knew it wouldn't solve anything. He needed information. He needed to know who was behind this, what they wanted, and why Emily was at the center of it all. Tell me who's behind this, Razor demanded once more. The man sighed, as if resigned to his fate. You'll find out soon enough. They're everywhere, watching you, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, you won't be able to hide. Razor's jaw clenched as the man's words hit him like a sledgehammer. This was bigger than just a couple of thugs after money. There were people with power, dangerous people, behind all of this. Razor didn't know who they were, but he would find out. And he would make sure they never got their hands on Emily. Razor stepped back, pushing the man away. Get out of here. And don't come back, Razor said, his voice cold as ice. The man stood up, dusting himself off, a dark look in his eyes. You think you've won? You haven't even scratched the surface, the man said, his tone venomous. With one last look, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Razor watched him go, his fists clenched. This was far from over. Razor didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them take Emily. Not without a fight. He returned to the cabin, his mind reeling from everything the man had said. Emily was still inside, sitting by the fire. She looked up as he walked in, her expression filled with concern. What did he say? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Razor's heart clenched at the sight of her. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing. He had to protect her. "We need to leave," Razor said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We're not safe here. They're coming for us." The night felt colder now, the weight of what the man had said hanging over Razor like a dark cloud. He stood in the doorway of the cabin, looking out into the dense woods, his mind racing. The cryptic words of the man echoed in his ears. "They're everywhere, watching you, waiting for the right moment." Razor didn't know who they were, but he knew they were dangerous. Whoever was after Emily was relentless, and they weren't going to stop. Razor's chest tightened. Emily had been through enough, and now he was the one putting her at risk. But he wasn't about to back down. Not now. Razor turned back to the cabin and walked inside, his boots heavy on the floor. Emily was still sitting by the fire, her expression filled with worry. She had asked him what the man said, but Razor hadn't been able to answer her yet. He had to keep her calm. "We need to leave," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What happened? What did he say?" Razor took a deep breath, walking over to her. "We're not safe here. He's not the only one looking for us. There are more people, more dangerous people, after you. We can't stay here." Emily's face paled, and Razor could see the fear in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. Razor's heart ached at the sight of her. She was just a kid, and all of this danger, this fear, wasn't her fault. He couldn't let her go through this alone. "I'll protect you," Razor said, crouching down in front of her. "I promise we'll get through this. But we need to keep moving." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Razor didn't have an answer. He hadn't figured that part out yet. But he couldn't stay here, not with the threat closing in. He had to keep moving, keep them both one step ahead. "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out," Razor said, his voice firm. "We just have to keep moving, stay ahead of them." Emily nodded slowly, her small hands clasping together in her lap. Razor could see the fear in her, but there was something else too, something he hadn't noticed before. She was strong, stronger than he'd given her credit for. She had been through more than anyone her age should have to endure, and yet she was still here, still standing. Razor stood up and grabbed his bag, quickly checking to make sure he had everything they needed. "We're leaving now. We can't waste any more time." Emily stood up too, slowly. Razor could see the hesitation in her, but she was moving, following him as he walked toward the door. He opened it and stepped out into the cold, the dark woods stretching out before them. Razor paused for a moment, his senses alert. He didn't hear any sounds, no signs of movement, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He had the distinct feeling they were being watched. "Stay close," Razor said, his voice low. Emily nodded, falling in line behind him as they moved quickly through the woods. Razor kept his pace steady, his eyes scanning their surroundings. He didn't know where they were going yet, but he knew they couldn't go back. They had to keep moving, keep running, but also stay smart. Razor's thoughts raced as they walked. Where could they go? What could they do? He had no answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't stop until Emily was safe. They moved in silence, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional rustle of branches in the wind. Razor's mind was working overtime, trying to come up with a plan, but the only thing he could focus on was keeping Emily safe. The path ahead seemed endless, the woods stretching out into the darkness. Razor felt like they were walking in circles, but he didn't dare stop. He couldn't let his guard down. As they walked deeper into the forest, Razor started to notice something. A feeling that wasn't just paranoia, but the unmistakable sense of being followed. The hairs on his neck stood up again, and he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. There was nothing, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Razor's pulse quickened as he turned back to Emily. "Stay close, Emily," he said again, his voice urgent. "We need to keep moving. Don't stop, no matter what." Emily's footsteps faltered for a moment, but then she picked up the pace, her eyes wide, but determined. Razor glanced around, scanning the trees, the ground, looking for any sign that they were being followed. Then he heard it, a faint sound, something soft but distinct, like the crunch of leaves underfoot. Razor's eyes narrowed. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was behind them. He could feel the tension building, his instincts screaming at him to act. But there was nowhere to hide in the dense woods. The only thing he could do was keep moving, keep ahead of whoever was following them. "We're almost there," Razor said, his voice steady, even though his mind was racing. He didn't know where there was, but he knew they couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The air in the woods grew colder as Razor's steps quickened, the sensation of being followed growing stronger with each passing moment. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck prickling, the forest around them eerily silent, save for the sound of their footsteps crunching the dried leaves underfoot. Emily was right behind him, her presence a constant reminder of what he was fighting for. He couldn't let her down. Not now. Razor glanced over his shoulder once more. Nothing. The shadows in the woods were thick, but there was still no sign of their pursuers. But Razor's instincts were telling him they were closer than ever. Every movement in the trees, every slight shift of wind, had his senses on high alert. His heart beat faster as he kept walking, refusing to let himself look back again. They had to keep moving forward. Razor's eyes scanned the path ahead, searching for anything that could give him a clue about where to go. His mind raced. He had no plan, no map, and only a vague sense of direction. The feeling of being followed was starting to wear on him, but he couldn't afford to stop now. The thought of Emily in danger was more than he could bear. "Keep up, Emily," Razor said, his voice urgent. She responded with a soft, "I'm trying." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't slow down. He could hear her footsteps behind him, steady though faint, a small comfort in the growing tension. But Razor's mind kept circling back to the man he had confronted earlier. "They're everywhere," the man had said. Razor had no idea what that meant, but it sounded like they were being hunted by more than just random thugs. This was something much bigger. Whoever was behind all of this had eyes everywhere. Razor couldn't let that stop him, though. He had to focus on Emily's safety. She needed him. "Stay close," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's response was a quiet nod, though Razor couldn't see her face. Her presence at his back was a reminder of everything he had to protect. They kept walking in silence, the path narrowing as they ventured deeper into the woods. Razor's thoughts were racing, each one darker than the last. The woods were beginning to feel like a trap, and Razor had no idea how to get them out of it. His mind kept drifting back to the idea that they were being followed. Could it be the man from earlier? Or was it someone else, someone worse? Razor knew they couldn't keep moving forever. They needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere they could regroup. But Razor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded somewhere, that every step they took was part of a larger, more sinister plan, as if the woods themselves were closing in around them. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to trust his instincts. He had to believe they were still one step ahead. Razor's pace slowed as they approached a clearing, and his eyes flicked nervously to the trees around them. Something didn't feel right. A low sound, barely perceptible, reached his ears, the faint rustling of footsteps not too far behind. Razor froze, his heart skipping a beat. His mind immediately snapped to the worst-case scenario. They had been caught. He reached for the gun at his side, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. He had to make a decision now. If they were going to face whoever was following them, he needed to take control. But as he prepared to turn, he heard a voice from behind. "Don't shoot," the voice said, calm but forceful. Razor's heart leapt into his throat. He didn't know who it was, but the voice carried an authority that made him hesitate. "Razor, it's me." The voice was familiar, though Razor couldn't place it immediately. It was deeper, more controlled, like someone who had been through too many close calls. He turned slowly, keeping the gun ready in his hand. But then he saw the man stepping out from the shadows, a familiar face. His eyes widened in recognition. "Ben?" Razor asked, disbelief in his voice. "What the hell are you doing here?" Ben, a former acquaintance from Razor's past, stepped into the clearing. He was wearing a tactical jacket and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was rough, older, but there was no mistaking it. Ben had been a part of Razor's old circle, someone he trusted once. "I came to help," Ben said, his expression serious. "You're not safe out here, Razor. They've been tracking you, both of you." Razor didn't lower his gun, though his heart had begun to slow. He didn't know if he could trust Ben, not after everything that had happened. "You're with them now?" Razor demanded, his eyes narrowing. Ben shook his head, his expression hard. "No, I'm not with them." I'm not a part of whatever this is. But I know who is, and I've got some information that can help you get out of this alive. Razor's instincts screamed at him to keep his distance. Trust was hard to come by in his world, and even harder now, when everything felt like it was falling apart. But Ben's words made him pause. Why now? Razor asked. Ben's jaw tightened, and he glanced over his shoulder into the dark woods behind him. Because it's about to get worse, Razor. They've got eyes everywhere. But I know where you can go, where they won't find you. Razor still didn't lower his weapon. And why should I believe you? Ben sighed, looking Razor in the eyes. Because I'm the one who's been running from them too. And I'm not the one who's going to let them get you or that kid. Razor's eyes flicked to Emily, still standing behind him, her face full of confusion and uncertainty. Razor's gut told him that they had no choice but to trust Ben. At least for now. All right, Razor said, lowering the gun. But if this is a setup, I'll make sure you regret it. Ben nodded, his face hardening as he stepped closer. I wouldn't expect anything less. The woods around them were thick and shadowed, the silence pressing down like a weight on Razor's chest as he followed Ben through the trees. Emily was close behind, still quiet, still unsure of everything that had happened. Razor could feel the tension building in the air, the sense of urgency pushing him forward. He didn't trust Ben entirely, but for now, there was no other choice. Ben had been right about one thing. The people chasing them were relentless, and Razor needed every advantage he could get. He couldn't afford to take chances. We're almost there, Ben said, his voice low and steady. Razor didn't respond. His thoughts were consumed with keeping Emily safe, with finding out who was behind all of this. The fact that Ben had come to him now, after everything, made Razor nervous. Was Ben part of it all? Was this a trap? But Razor had no choice but to trust him, for now. The trees began to thin as they approached a small clearing. Razor's eyes scanned the area, looking for any signs of danger, but it was quiet. Too quiet. Ben stopped abruptly, turning to face Razor. This is it, Ben said, his voice carrying a strange finality. We'll hide here for now. But I'm telling you, things are going to get worse. They're coming for you. And for her. Razor's heart pounded as he looked around. It was a small, nondescript cabin, hidden in the trees. There were no signs of life, but the structure had clearly been abandoned for some time. The windows were dark, and the roof was covered in moss, as if it hadn't seen use in years. But Razor didn't care about the state of the cabin. He cared about getting Emily to safety. We'll need supplies, Razor said, his voice tight. Do you have anything here? Ben nodded and led the way inside. Razor hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Emily. She was standing just behind him, her eyes wide, her face pale. She didn't say anything, but Razor could see the fear in her eyes. She was trying to be brave, but he could feel the weight of the world on her small shoulders. It wasn't fair. None of this was. He turned and followed Ben inside. The cabin was small, with only a few rooms. There was a cot in the corner, a table in the center, and shelves filled with dusty cans and dried goods. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. Ben moved to a corner of the cabin and started rummaging through a duffel bag. Razor watched him carefully, his hand never straying far from the gun at his side. He didn't trust Ben fully, but he was running out of options. The time for questioning was over. They had to move, and fast. You're sure this place is safe? Razor asked, his voice low. For now, Ben replied, not looking up. It's remote. They won't find you here, at least not yet. But you can't stay here forever. They're watching every move you make. Razor clenched his jaw. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't realized just how deep this went. Who are they, Ben? Razor asked, his voice a mixture of anger and frustration. Who's behind all of this? Ben paused, his back still turned as he searched through the bag. After a moment, he sighed and finally spoke. It's bigger than we thought. They've been tracking her for a long time. You don't understand what she's involved in. The people after her, they're not just a gang. There's something more. Razor's mind raced as he absorbed Ben's words. Something more? What did that even mean? What do you mean something more? Razor pressed. Who are they? Ben turned then, his expression serious, the weight of the situation settling over him. I'm not going to lie to you, Razor. The people chasing her, they're tied to things you can't even imagine. They're not just after money or power. They're after something that Emily doesn't even know she has. Something that's been kept from her for years. Razor's stomach dropped. Emily was involved in something much bigger than he had ever imagined. What is it? Razor demanded. What do they want with her? Ben shook his head. I don't know the full story, but I know this. The longer you wait to find out, the more dangerous it becomes. They're not going to stop until they get what they want, and they'll hurt anyone who gets in their way. Razor's fists clenched. This was the moment. He had promised to protect Emily, and now he had to follow through. We need to get her out of here, Razor said, his voice cold and determined. We need to find out what's going on, and we need to do it now. Ben nodded, a flicker of understanding passing across his face. I can help you, he said, his voice steady. But you need to trust me. We'll need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be to get out of this. Razor didn't hesitate. He was done waiting. He had no more time to waste. He had to get Emily out, and he had to make sure she was safe, no matter the cost. As Razor turned to Emily, his heart ached. She was still standing there, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. It's going to be okay, he said softly, trying to reassure her. She nodded, but Razor could see the uncertainty in her eyes. They were in this together, and together, they would figure this out. Razor's grip on the gun tightened as he turned back to Ben. Let's go, Razor said, his voice firm. We're not running anymore. We're fighting. Immerse yourself in the gripping world of Hell Angels stories where danger, loyalty, and survival intertwine. In this thrilling tale, a Hell's Angels biker finds himself navigate through treacherous situations, uncover secrets that could change everything, and decide who he can trust. The world of Hell Angels stories is complex, and this one takes readers on a roller coaster of emotions, challenges, and unexpected twists. As the biker and the girl run for their lives, they uncover more about the shadowy figures chasing them and the dangerous motives behind their pursuit. Hell Angels stories delve deep into the world of brotherhood, survival, and the price of loyalty, offering a unique perspective on a life lived on the edge. This intense journey through the woods, as they fight to stay one step ahead, keeps the tension high and the stakes even higher, showing just how far the biker is willing to go to protect what matters most.